Hi, Eric.
Hi, Aaron. How are you?
We have a subtitle to our podcast. Do you remember what it is?
Something about the Berkeley Wardian.
That's right, LDS Miscellany through a Berkeley lens. And we have with us another Berkeleyan.
Mr. Miscellany himself, David.
That's right.
David, would you like to say hello?
Hello.
That's right. Thanks for coming in, David.
Thank you for having me.
So we understand that you have an interest in the topic that we're talking about today. So today, and full spoiler alert going forward, we're doing The Good Place, the series finale, episode 4 point last of The Good Place. So if you haven't seen it, we're going to spoil the whole thing, and we're going to talk about it.
Science says spoilers make things more enjoyable.
That's true.
I feel so validated for you saying that.
So understand you have an interest in The Good Place, and or in general, or?
Yeah, I like The Good Place. Although I'm not sure if that's what's landed me here today.
Okay.
I think that has more to do with the fact that I have an interest in film and media.
Excellent.
Although I have watched all The Good Place and I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah.
I am not a super fan like a lot of other people I know.
Okay. Tell us about your interest in film and media.
I just am a junkie for
Okay.
it. I am one of those couch potato dreamers who wishes that they could have been a critic in another life or have made films, and I don't think that those daydreams will ever go away, but I find a lot of fulfillment in it. The Oscars just happen, and that's my Super Bowl. And so I often tell people I like to watch movies like others read books.
That's great. So we both, so Eric and I both realized that The Good Place finale specifically would be great to do an episode on for Face and Hat because of its awesome relationship to just theology in general, philosophy and the afterlife and things like that. I'm super excited to talk about it.
Okay, well, Aaron, this is your idea. Start us off. Like, do you remember the moment where you decided specifically that we should talk about this?
Yeah. So during the episode, what I saw, was specifically that I was trying to understand what happens when a person is immortal for a very long time, right? And I found myself disagreeing with the central premise of the final episode. And so that made me, because I felt like that it didn't align with what I understood about the afterlife. And that's what I thought would make it a good discussion.
Ironically, my wife had something of an opposite reaction. And I don't know if The Good Place was part of what's gotten her thinking about this, but the last year or so she's been thinking about eternity as abysmally long and impossible, and like it just doesn't make sense. Who would want to be around that long? So I think she's had sort of a different reaction to the finale.
Excellent. I heard so many good things people said about the finale, and I agreed with them. It was awesome. But this particular part of how people would go through the door and evaporate and return their essence to the universe, I was like, no, don't, that's not, stop. So that was my reaction to it. What did you think, David?
You know, for a show that took its time to set up a lot of its ideas and to break them down, I thought that the endings were incredibly rushed.
Mm-hmm.
That they went through all of this and then they come to the good place, the real good place, and then suddenly they're like, there's a problem. We're going to solve this in 5 minutes. It took us 4 seasons to solve all the other problems.
Yeah.
But this will be solved in 5 minutes by just putting a door and saying, hey, now you can die.
Uh-huh.
I think that I had both reactions. So, Eric, for what Lindsay was feeling, I had that feeling when the Lisa Kudrow character was talking about how eternity was just too long and she wasn't having any fulfillment anymore. But I think I had the same reaction that you were having, Aaron, about going through the door, because I think that there was a lot of variables they left out of the equations to make a nice, neat little ending that didn't allow for any sort of progression except for Tahani's character.
So that's one aspect that I want to talk about. I want to talk, essentially, I want to talk about exaltation in general and how it relates to the good place finale, and I want to talk about redemption in general and how it relates to the good place finale. So, what if we started with a beat by beat, just quick recap of the finale?
Okay, that'd be fine. I meant to rewatch it this afternoon and I didn't. I fell asleep instead.
So, just a quick recap. So, the episode starts with Michael trying to learn the guitar. All right, and he's doing terribly. Right. Then we have Jason's dance party as he decides he's going to go through the door and he loses his locket. Okay. Then we have Tahani and she starts carving wood. Right, and she eventually decides that she's not going to leave. She has her party, right? And then we have Chidi and Eleanor, and Chidi decides to leave, and Eleanor tries to stop and eventually accepts, right? And then finally we have Eleanor trying to work out things with Mindy and Michael, and then she goes to the door. And finally the big payoff at the end is Michael saying, "Take it sleazy," right? So that's just a quick beat by beat. Just a recap of what happens. But essentially, we deal with the three of the four main characters coming to some kind of conclusion for their arcs, and the fourth character deciding to do something different.
Wait, I'm confused. Who isn't doing something different also some kind of conclusion?
Yes, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
Can I know that we're going to talk about the exaltation parts, but can I tell you one thing that kind of bugged me about the show in general?
Yeah.
Was its lack of theology and religion. I understand that it had to be sanitized to make it so, because they wanted to have a platform to talk about philosophy and these ethics and these ideas in an entertaining show, and to put in one religion would make it quite controversial. I get that. But in their effort to avoid dogma, they created dogma in which I don't think worked. That makes the show fall apart. In that, for example, they talked about the Jeremy Laramie, right? And it's supposed to be their attempt for explaining Mircea Eliade's sacred time, and as opposed to profane time. And so
I don't know what that means.
So in a nutshell, this was an idea. It's been an idea for a long time, but Eliade talked a lot about it, and he is a philosopher, anthropologist who studied religion for many years. He's Romanian, and he's a very interesting character. But he talks about the idea that profane time is linear time. There's a beginning and there's an end. We grow, and it goes in one direction, and it only goes in that one direction. What we live in every day. Sacred time is, when it comes to religious ideas, are things that are happening at all points, and that there is no real time. So, for example, the atonement in LDS theology is that it's always happening. That right now the decisions and actions that we make are somehow having an effect on something that happened 2,000 years ago. Maybe that's a dumb example, but something like that, where sacred time goes in a different way, where we can access points, hierophanies, sacred moments and experiences that happen, so God can be omnipresent at that point. So in here, they talk about Jeremy Laramie in a way to explain how they're able to go back in time to bring them back to life, even though they've lived for like 500 years after the first two seasons. But if that's the case, and not really following that, by the time Michael gets back to the good place, everybody will be gone because of the way they the way that they went about it. But in reality, Eleanor and everybody should still be there. They wouldn't have ever left. And so the whole her going into the universe and then affecting him and then not being there when he returns wouldn't actually make sense. And so the avoidance of that dogma, and I know this is me putting up my glasses and writing in the comment section, well, and actually, they should have done this. Yeah. But it just seems like there would have been a lot of little moments that could have been more interesting to me had they introduced some theological ideas that were not specific to a particular religion.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're saying Jeremy
Baramy.
Sorry. Yeah, Jeremy Baramy. So you're saying that particular idea itself is from religious, but wasn't called out as something religious. But they did use Buddhism in the final episode. So they didn't not use religious
Did
ideas.
they name check Buddhism? I was trying to remember.
Yeah, they did.
Because it feels like a pretty Mormon afterlife until it's suddenly a Buddhist afterlife.
Right. That's very good. Can you go into more detail on like what do you mean?
Sure. So there's this idea of progression, right? But eventually you are perfect, and then that's where progression ends, and so you just dissolve back into intelligences, and you land on people next to trash cans.
That's right.
But,
yeah.
But it's funny because Buddhism always touts itself as not a religion, and it's a philosophy. So I felt like they could get away with it.
That depends on the Buddhist.
It does depend on some of the Buddhists, and the way that they describe nirvana and becoming exalted into a Buddha is different as well. I spent 3 days with a Buddhist nun in San Jose once, and she described it as Buddha means you become God. And that was how she interpreted it, and that's how she lived her life. And so it is a little different, but but one thing I have read pretty consistently is that they try to shuck the idea of religion over the idea of philosophy.
My MTC companion was an immigrant from Taiwan to the Seattle area. And his parents joined the church in Taiwan because the Mormon view of the afterlife was just overlapped perfectly with their understanding of the Buddhist view of the afterlife. And so they found a lot of truth in that specifically, which is what led them to become Latter-day Saints.
Okay, so this is what I really, really liked about the finale, okay, was the redemption, okay? So
redemption of
every single character except for two, okay? Can you guys name the two characters that weren't redeemed by the end of this?
I just looked at your notes.
Okay, but you don't get to say anything. You haven't looked. Okay, so David, what are the two characters that aren't redeemed by the end of the show?
One of them is somebody I completely forgotten about.
Yeah.
Well, Janet, because she doesn't need redemption.
Yeah, I wasn't counting Janet.
Yeah, that's a good point, though.
I was considering
Maybe
her.
outsmarted you.
That's true. Fair enough.
And the judge never changed either.
I actually do. Janet actually was redeemed, if you count the bad Janets.
They're separate entities.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. But the actual Janet was kind of redeemed too because she changed so much, right?
Well, according to Margaret O of the Exponent, Janet develops from Alexa in the first episode to Heavenly Mother by the final episode.
Oh, I like that reading. That's really good.
So that sounds like some kind of redemption, perhaps.
That's good. Okay. Nope, but there are two. Okay, I'll tell you. The first one is, go ahead.
Yeah, the Adam Scott character.
Adam Scott, Trevor.
I managed to completely forget about.
And the only, and I'm going to give him a pass, all right? Because, they probably couldn't get him. There's probably a scheduling conflict.
Yeah.
But the other one was Brent. Okay, so I'm going to come back to Brent in a second. I'm going to give you a list of.
That's the
jerk.
Yeah,
from season 4.
But he's in the process.
The womanizer. So yeah, we're going to come back to that. Here's a list of every character that was redeemed. Okay. The frog guy.
Because he gets a real frog? Or
yeah,
why?
Because his character changes. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Oh, so you're just talking about not eternal static.
So this one's a bit wishy-washy. Okay, fair enough. But the rest of them I think are pretty solid. Okay? Sean and Vicky, so the actual demons, right? And every other demon. Jason's dad. Okay?
Yes.
Doug Fawcett. All right? Jason's entire dance crew. Jason's friend from the safe, I couldn't remember his name.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yes, I don't remember his
like
name.
Donkey.
Yes, I'd forgotten how he died.
No, that was yeah. So Jason himself, who became an actual monk at the end of the show. Tahani's sister and parents, the gossip guy. In other words, all 4 of the other test subjects, including Simone. The main cast, Glenn and all the other demons, all of Eleanor's friends, including the really bad one from the first season.
And her mother.
And Eleanor's mother, right? Chidi's childhood friend, Mindy and Derek. And Brent is in the system, but I freeze framed on, and he's on attempt 15,704.
I mean, that's a big number, but we're talking eternity. It's not
right?
that big of a number.
So that's awesome. And this is what I actually thought was really cool because it's a bit different than the LDS philosophy.
Yes, can I read something to you?
Yeah.
You've just made an enemy, Aaron.
Okay.
Bruce R. McConkie is here, rising from the dead, to accuse you of committing one of the 7 deadly heresies.
I'm ready.
Heresy 1 is that God is progressing in knowledge and learning new truths. Now, none of these characters are God, but...
Wait, this is one of the heresies.
This is the first of the 7 deadly heresies.
Tawny is God.
Arguably, I mean, how is she different from God, right? I mean,
at this point, at the end, she's a god.
She is an architect, and that's very godlike. Brother McConkie asks, will he one day, meaning God, learn something that will destroy the plan of salvation and turn man and the universe into an uncreated nothingness? Will he discover a better plan of salvation than one he has already given to men and worlds without number? Isn't that essentially the overarching plot of The Good Place? The Good Place is the first deadly heresy, according to Brother McConkie.
Because it implies progression in a being that should have not be progressible.
Right, and it also implies that there might be a better system or a change in the system, or that, and he goes on, and the kingdom to kingdom idea. There's a lot of stuff that he doesn't really care for, and I'm not saying that we should necessarily consider the 7 deadly heresies talk. Heresy 5 is there will be no progression. Heresy 5 is there is progression from kingdom to kingdom, which I think is what The Good Place is all about.
This is what I wanted to talk about. So, what do you guys think? So just a quick definition, right? We have you die, you go to spirit world, there's a period of time, you're resurrected, you're assigned to one of 3 kingdoms, right? Celestial, terrestrial, and the telestial kingdom. And the reason I'm being a bit pedantic here is because we actually have some non-LDS listeners. So I want to make sure we define our vocabulary as if we need to. What do you think? What do you think the church teaches about movement between the kingdoms after judgment?
Oh yeah, I'm not going to touch that one.
So this gets to one of my... So I think one of the most difficult things about being a Latter-day Saint is humility. Because we absolutely think that that is an attribute we should possess, and we are also extremely and constantly guilty of none of it, right? We know how the afterlife works. The number of times that I've heard people comment post someone's death, like, well, at least we know what's going to happen, so we don't have that kind of suffering that other people have. Like, I think it's nonsense, frankly. Like, we may have some kind of roadmap, but the idea that we know what's going to happen in the afterlife just seems grotesquely prideful. We don't know that much.
This is what got me so excited about this finale, is that nearly every character was redeemed, which, if you applied it to LDS theology, if you assume, as Bruce R. McConkie said here, that you can't move between kingdoms, would not be possible.
Well, there's kind of a universalist thrust to Mormon theology, right? The idea that everyone is saved in some way, except for the handful of people who go to outer darkness. Everyone is saved in some way. Everybody has some kind of good afterlife.
But there is an answer to my question. What does the church teach?
Oh, did you find like a gospel, something on the website that is?
I found that on Fair Mormon.
Oh.
Do we count them as a good source? We asked that question in the very first episode of Face and Hat. Do we count Fair Mormon as a good source?
Sure.
I do.
I don't know if they're authoritative. Like,
do you know Fair Mormon, David?
I don't. I thought you were referring to farms at first. But
No, I don't know that they're affiliated, but are they? Oh, I actually don't know.
Answer that question, but
yeah, it's on the About page.
While you're looking up that answer, how many tries do you think it took Bruce R. McConkie to?
I know.
Yeah.
Question: do Mormons believe that there is a progression between the 3 degrees of glory?
And Fair Mormon says
there is no official pronouncement. Some leaders of the church have expressed deep skepticism, and there's a bunch of quotes.
Brother Bruce.
All right, but I wanted to read to you this specific passage from 1995, Boyd K. Packer.
Okay.
This is what he said. Some years ago, I was in Washington, D.C. with President Harold B. Lee. Early morning, he called me into his hotel room. He was sitting in his robe, reading gospel doctrine.
Wait, was he an angel at this point?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Reading gospel doctrine by President Joseph F. Smith. He said, "Listen to this." That was too
I have
loud.
a wild Joseph Fielding Smith quote, too.
Okay. Listen to this. Jesus had not finished his work when his body was slain. Neither did he finish it after his resurrection from the dead. Though he had accomplished the purpose for which he then came to the earth, he had not fulfilled all his work. And when will he? Not until he has redeemed and saved every son and daughter of our father Adam that have been or ever will be born upon this earth to the end of time, except the sons of perdition. That is his mission. We will not finish our work until we have saved ourselves, and then not until we have saved all depending on us. For we are to become saviors upon Mount Zion, as well as Christ. We are called to this mission. There was never a time, the prophet Joseph Smith taught, when the spirit is too old to approach God. All are within the reach of pardoning mercy, who have not committed the unpardonable sin. That came from the Ensign.
I used to accept that your kingdom assignment was permanent.
So did I, until
But
not an hour or two ago when I found this quote.
Oh, really? Yeah. I just, ultimately, though, I find it dissatisfying.
That belief that there's no movement?
Yes. Because I think the fundamental thing that LDS theology brings that is unique is this idea of eternal progression. And the idea that you have a 70-year sprint to make it on that train just seems inherently not in keeping with the character of God as I understand him.
So you don't subscribe to the idea that if you're in the terrestrial or telestial kingdom, that you're going to be Barbied and that you can only reach a certain level, and that's where single people go?
Speaking of Barbie, Joseph Fielding Smith said that some of the functions of the celestial body will not appear in terrestrial body, like the power of procreation. I take it, he says, that men and women will in these kingdoms be just what the so-called Christian world expects us all to be, neither man nor woman, merely immortal beings having received the resurrection.
Who's that?
Joseph Fielding Smith.
Okay, wait, okay, interesting.
So to come back to David's question, though, you want to jump in?
I was just going to say it is important to note at the end of this Fair Mormon article, not only do they say the church has not taken official stance, but it also talks about who can actually speak for the church. Right, and it specifically says not
listed above.
Not all statements from all general authorities are considered canon, and so it's important.
So
go ahead.
This is a point I've made in previous episodes, and it is something that I think is true. When it comes to stuff that we do not know and perhaps cannot know, I think this might be a question that we simply just can't understand the answer to, no matter how clearly God explains it to us. When you see something like Enoch's vision of seeing everything, right? He never really tries to explain that to us. Moses sees everything. He never really tries to explain. I think there's some things that cannot be understood by us at this point. And that's why I think that we have ecclesiastical authority to teach us in one way, and then we have the poets who teach us in another way. And I think what poets do is they ask questions and they explore possibilities. So I have two examples of poets today. The first one's actually a short story. I use poet as sort of a stand-in for artists, right? An acquaintance of mine, D. Michael Martindale, who has said that art is something about which perfect beings can disagree. And I love that idea, that when we're all perfect and we're all celestial, it doesn't mean we'll all think exactly the same way. And there'll be things in which we can disagree, and that is, I think, a really satisfyingly Mormon definition of art. So, first example. This is a short story by Roger Terry. This was published in Dialogue 10 years ago.
Of which we're a proud member.
Yes. So whenever you want to jump in and do our little pitch this week, you're certainly welcome to. But I'm going to read you the first couple paragraphs of the short story. This is called Eternal Misfit by Roger Terry. Kim had been in the terrestrial kingdom for 5,036 years, 2 months, and 17 days when it occurred to him that he was bored. So he leaves the library. He goes to his house. He realizes for the first time he wants to lay down, but there's no beds because nobody ever has to lay down in the terrestrial kingdom. What's wrong with me? He wondered aloud. He lay there for a long time on his sofa because there's no beds. How could anything be wrong? The terrestrial kingdom was like Utopia, Shangri-La, the Garden of Eden, and Camelot all wrapped into one. The weather was mostly sunny and warm with a slight breeze to caress the nerve endings and an occasional rain shower to refresh the plant life. Social order and perfect peace reigned. Anyway, Kim is suddenly dissatisfied. He had been a very boring, very safe person in his earth life.
Floodgates are open upstairs.
He became a very boring and safe resurrected person. And now, thousands of years into this, he's bored. So he he comes to the idea that we need opposition. He tries to create evil so that people will have to choose and be good. He introduces soccer so that there's competition. And the end of the story is a great story. I highly recommend it, and I'm spoiling it for you right now. But at the end of the story, he gets visited by some men in black from the Celestial Kingdom who give him an opportunity to become an immortal person, to go into a specific set of circumstances where he will have a choice to return to mortality. In other words, he's being given the opportunity to enter a Garden of Eden and be an Adam and start a new realm of mortality, because you have to have immortal people to make that choice, to like sacrifice their immortality. I'm not saying this is doctrine, right? This is totally speculative.
Yeah.
But the advantage to this kind of story, or the good place for that matter, is that it lets us explore questions without the need to be right or wrong, the need to like say this is theologically exactly what we believe, because that's very limiting and constraining to our imaginations as we try to imagine something.
Is there boredom in the Celestial Kingdom?
Well, I think that's what the good place suggests might be true, right? You might reach a point where it ends.
But that's because they had no concept of progression in there, in the way that we have extra ideas. So the Tahani, I feel like she gets a little bit of it, but some of the things that are devoid in the
Wait, before you go any farther, I actually have a list of the things that Tahani learns.
Oh,
I freeze framed on that. Do you want to hear it really quick?
sure.
Okay. So by the time that scene happens, she has landed a triple axel. She solved the Poincare conjecture. She became an opera singer. She burped the alphabet. She was a master woodworker. All right, and then other things.
Ron Swanson said so.
Yeah, because Ron Swanson said so. All right, her next task was to repave a driveway, become a master conductor of a train or an orchestra, beat NBA Jam.
Or an orchestra?
Yeah, both. It says both. It's two separate items, right? Beat NBA Jam on All-Star, free solo the Colossus of Rhodes, and that list was already in the 9300s, meaning she had already done 9300 other things. And at the end of the episode, when she decides that she's finished,
Yes.
she feels complete, is what she says. It was at 11K.
That's okay. That actually helps my point even more.
Okay.
Everything that you listed there was very selfish. It was all surrounding one person and internal needs of what she wanted to do. They felt accomplished by what they wanted to do. What Tahani did that was different from what the others did was that she wanted to go on and help people. And there is not going to be an end to that progression, because she will then have students, and she will be a steward over people, and their progression becomes her progression. There are no children in the good place. There are no families in the good place.
Yeah.
There are no ideas.
There are sort of maybe soulmates, but that's a little mushy.
Kind of, yeah, and everything about their decision to go to move on is, boiling it down, is selfish, and so that's where their progression ends. There would be more if they went on with the LDS theology. Not saying that the show should have been LDS, but the point of our progression is not about I get to be a god and I get to make dinosaurs. No, it's about
Speak for yourself, Dave.
I mean, I personally want to make griffins if I get to be there,
nice.
but it's about our posterity, right? At least that's the way I've understood it, and that's why I think Tahani is the most Mormon, as you had said earlier.
Yeah, this
She
is
has a connection to her earthly family that's more important to her goals than the other characters, and then also she has this creation aspect to her afterwards.
okay. So this is the thing that I love most about Tahani's development. All right, because I really do agree that it most encapsulates what exaltation means to LDS folks. Joseph Fielding Smith,
No.
different than Joseph Smith F. Smith.
Oh no, I was talking about Joseph Fielding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, he said,
Special guest star, Joseph Fielding Smith.
all right, they shall increase in knowledge, wisdom, and power. going from grace to grace until the fullness of the perfect day shall burst upon them. It's a very classic LDS quote, right? Mm-hmm. And this is what you can actually see. You can actually see in the episode when the fullness of the perfect day bursts upon Tahani. When she realizes that she is complete and that she doesn't want to go and that she wants to instead start helping others, right? And it goes back to what you said and to the quote earlier from Boyd K. Packer's experience, right? Where you save yourself first, right? And then you work on others. So I actually think that you said it was selfish to learn all these things, but to live the kind of life that God lives, which is the LDS definition of exaltation, in my opinion, there has to be a period of education, right? There has to be, however much you don't like physics, maths, biology, whatever, right? I just think that the only way to internalize exaltation is that you have to learn. Again, I think we've quoted this before. Doctor Strange, maybe we did this analogy already.
If so, it's been a while. I don't recall it.
So Doctor Strange is sitting. Sitting there with the Supreme Sorceress, and his hands are trembling, and he can't make any of the magic work. Okay. And he says, I just can't do it. These other people can just do all this amazing stuff, right? But I can't do it. And then he says, how do I get from here to there? And she asks, how did you become a surgeon? Right? Well, through years of study and practice. And that's what she says. Well, there you go. So Tahani, of the four, Tahani is the one that really exemplifies LDS exaltation. Now, I'm wondering if they didn't do that on purpose.
Do what on purpose? Make her Mormon?
Well,
I'm guessing that's not it.
No, I'm just saying the whole. So Michael Schur?
I think it's Schur.
Schur, the guy who was the producer, right? Yeah. This is the guy that came from Parks and Rec, yes. And he had such a good show that they're like, okay, do whatever you want, and he settled on moral philosophy. Yeah.
Normal choice.
It's so inclusive, right? It just wouldn't surprise me if he knew a bit about Mormonism.
It's possible. They did a lot of research.
Here's a fun question. What other churches in the world, religious beliefs, believe in a deification like we do?
If you go to Eastern religions, they may have somewhat different definitions, but there would be many Buddhists and Sikhs and Taoists who would say that there is deity as the ultimate goal.
And if you listen to some Hindu mythology, the stories they tell about the gods are very similar to the stories we tell about ourselves, about sort of endless versions of a particular god, right? Coming out one after another through time. So, yeah, I don't think there's anything quite like us, but
I would argue that Sikhism is probably the closest relative we have religiously. The story of Guru Nanak and Joseph Smith are identical.
A little uncanny, yeah.
So I don't know about this. Tell me about it.
Quick. So my father's Sikh, and so I wanted to do some research into it. Basically, about 600-700 years ago, there was a guy who was trying to decide between Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus in India, and he couldn't decide which religion to join, and so he decided to go away and to pray, and he came back a few days later after having received a vision. He went down by a river, I think, and disappeared. Does the story sound familiar at all?
A little bit.
And then he comes back and he writes a book which has become their guru. Is their last guru. I think they have 12 gurus altogether. And they believe in a word of wisdom that is stricter than ours. They have garments. They have a temple. They have tenets that are very similar to LDS theology. And if you talk to Sikhs and go to their gurdwaras, I'm saying that incredibly wrong, but they're temples. Then
there's one just down the road.
And if you go, they'll feed you, and they have great food.
Cool.
But they'll say that their job is to meditate and to become one with God till you become God. And so
that's awesome.
there's a lot of similarities.
Would it surprise you to learn that the early Christian church believed in deification?
No. In fact, that is something I knew, though I don't know how widely agreed that is among scholars, or if isn't that sort of a Gnostic idea?
Isn't that kind of the point of theology?
Yeah. To go back to the original.
Yeah, the original church believed that too. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but there's a great mural of George Washington becoming God in Washington, D.C.
Right, it's right here.
It's also a Masonic idea.
So this is called...
Is that what that is? No, I'm familiar with that painting. I didn't know that's what it was about.
Right, so we'll put a link in the notes. This is the Apotheosis of George Washington. This is from the Wikipedia article on Apotheosis, right? And it is a more, I don't know, techie word? Is that a way to put it? To say deification.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a specialized term.
Right. So here is a quote from... So the Eastern Orthodox Church still kind of believes in this, from what I understand,
really?
based on this article anyway, right?
That could be. I have no idea. The Orthodox religions are all sort of overwhelmed by Catholics in my mind.
So
any differences between them, I am unaware of.
Here, let me go ahead and find the thing I wanted to read.
Well, while you're doing that, I'm going to read a line from Michael Schur talking about the good place, and it's from an article about how their understanding of the show changed as they were making the show. As opposed to trying to become perfect, you reach the understanding, Michael Schur says, as long as you're trying, you're on the right path, which is sort of the philosophy that ground down into a single sentence of what the good place ends out. As long as you're trying and you're moving forward, then that's good. The old system is broken. As long as you're trying, you're going somewhere.
That is... It goes back to what you said originally, David, which is that the actual religion is missing from the good place, right? So there's no redeemer, right?
Yes.
Unless you count like people helping each other, but there's no sacrifice for sin in the good place.
Yes.
And they try to heavily lean on ethics rather than morals. But I think if there's a lesson to be taught from the good place, is that the learning and studying of ethics will not make you ethical or make you moral. And all of those lessons, they became moral people, not because of Chidi's lessons, but in spite of them. I think that's the idea of meta-ethics.
Okay. I'll have to take your word for it. Here's the quote I was trying to say. All right. The Westminster Dictionary of Christian Theology contains the following in an article titled Deification. Deification is, for orthodoxy, the goal of every Christian. Man, according to the Bible, is made in the image and likeness of God. It is possible for man to become God, like God, to become deified, to become God in grace. This doctrine is based on many passages in the Old and New Testament.
This is Eastern Orthodox?
Yeah,
This has never come up in conversation before.
I have no idea.
I thought we were lonely heretics in the Orthodox. Interesting.
All right. And then it talks about Saint Irenaeus in his famous phrase. So Saint Irenaeus...
Or as we like to call him in other Christian circles, Saint Erroneous.
Oh, no. If the Word has been made man, it is so that men may be made gods. And this becomes the standard in Greek theology. And in the 4th century, Saint Apotheosis repeats Irenaeus almost word for word, and in the 5th century, they say we will become sons by participation. So what happens is that this teaching kind of falls out of favor, right? And then the Western question, I don't know that this is what they split over. I mean, I would have said that it was, wasn't it like King Louis or something?
Oh no, it was earlier than that.
This is way earlier. Fair enough. Right? But the Roman Catholic Church does not use this term. Anyway, it became split, and then there became this gulf, right? As the churches diverged in the Western Catholic tradition, there became this gulf between man and God, where there's simply no way for you to become like him. He's so far away from us, right? Which is kind of how the good place starts. It embraces this gulf where if you're a human, And at one point, even in this episode, when Tahani wants to become a god, Michael responds to her that she can't, right?
Yeah.
You're a person. It's impossible, is what he says, right? And this gulf exists, right? And because of this gulf, the very human belief that immortality equals boredom is wrapped up in the good place. And this is one of the things I didn't like about that episode, is because we just reject it. Immortality does not equal boredom.
The first time I had ever thought of the concept of heaven being boring was in high school when I had a friend who was a very devout Catholic, and he said, "Man, heaven's going to be so boring." What are you talking about? Heaven's supposed to be awesome.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, well, all you do is you sit on a cloud, you get your little harp, and you praise God for the rest of eternity. I don't really want to do that. And it occurred to me, that was the first time that it had occurred to me the difference in our religion compared to everyone else's. And I think that as a high schooler, there is a sanitized version of doctrine that I didn't fully comprehend, and maybe it was not being taught to me. I don't know. Whatever the circumstances, the variables may be. It was in that moment that I realized, wait, our heaven is cool because we do stuff. Like, we have a job, and like you continue working. I think it was wasn't it Brigham Young who had that vision of Joseph Smith, and Joseph was busy, and he had like papers in his hands, and he was
I've heard this.
I have work to do, and you've got work, and you're going to be here soon, and that sounds far more comforting to me than constant worship of God, which I have always, maybe this sounds bad, I've always found that to be a turnoff for me when it comes to other theologies who embrace the idea of just sort of a selfish God.
Yeah. Well, and the familial relationships too, right? This is the other part that just made me sad, and it made Eleanor sad, is when Chidi left, right? Yeah. And it just drove me crazy. It's like, and Eleanor even says, "This is sad," echoing how I was feeling. But I did appreciate the encapsulation of many different afterlives in the show's finale. I thought that was cool.
I think this is also a Buddhist idea, isn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea of not like being connected to everything, which of course is the same thing as being connected to nothing, right? No special connections, not really valuing one thing over another, which seems to be the point they get to when they enter through the door.
Could I grab another element of the good place that I felt was incredibly Mormon?
Okay.
If there's one Christian church that takes all the fun out of it, it's us. In that our angels don't have wings. They don't just magically appear. They walk through portals.
You know what?
We don't have
The science fiction
magic.
religion.
We don't have, we wear suits. The business and legal aspects of the good place and how professional it was mirrored LDS, I don't want to say theology, but LDS attitudes, in that we often say that God is the greatest scientist, and our prophets, unlike the Pope, who has all of this wonderful costumes and everything that they wear, our prophets just wear suits and a tie that you could buy at any
Mr.
store.
Max.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of that mysticism out, which is what I find so great about your title, because the early church had those kind of elements, but modern Mormonism, or LDS thought, or what do we call it now? Do we have a new
Mormonism?
That we kind of take all of that out, and the Good Place did that. It started off a little bit crazier, but as it continued on, it completely got rid of all the magic and mysticism of what the afterlife would be, I thought.
It's very scientific, and one of the tenets of our show is science and science and literature. You could kind of say that those are kind of our two tenets, right? And that's the other thing that I really liked about The Good Place, right? Is that there was no magic, right? It's just that Janet knew everything, right? If she looked like she was doing magic, it was because she was doing science things, right? And this is how we believe God works, is that he just knows how stuff works.
And I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I'm a little disappointed in that. I accept it. It's not like a huge deal breaker for me, but sometimes I wish, sometimes I am jealous of Catholic theology, for example, because it's so much more exciting.
Well, there is a bit of mysticism in Mormonism in its science, okay? And this comes back to the whole things that act and things that are acted upon, right? The idea is that matter is intelligence and so forth. And so I just remember this old talk I once heard that described it like this. When Christ says, turns water into wine, right? This guy said that he was asking the water to become wine. Right? And because the water is made of intelligence, and because it's honor-bound to do what Christ says, because it respects him as a moral person.
Wait, who said this?
I have no idea. This isn't.
I've heard this before.
You've heard this before.
When they say that, God can move a mountain, he's talking to the individual intelligences that will be listening to him. That's why the phrase that we are lower than the dust of the earth, because the dust of the earth fulfills its purpose and does not deny God.
And is obedient.
And we are not. Still, though, that reinforces the idea that it's not magical.
Yeah. It's honor. Have anybody read Brandon Sanderson here?
I have not, but my son reads a lot of Brandon Sanderson.
He's an author. One of his series is called the Stormlight Archive, and in it there are these spirits, and they call them Spren. Okay.
Brandon Sanderson is LDS, by the way, for those who
and he plays Magic the Gathering. So for me, he's like this trifecta of people that I like, right? So some of them are called honor Spren, and they respect people that are honorable, right? And they'll help out because of that, essentially. So it's very, because he's LDS, of course, it seeps into his works, and it's very cool to see that.
So the first season is supposed to be a concept of hell is other people, which I believe the show actually, the first season is much like that play No Exit. Have either of you ever read that?
Is that Edward Albee?
I don't know. That thing doesn't sound familiar. Maybe you need to look it up. I think it's a philosopher who wrote this. I'm not that familiar with it. But there's a play about people who are in hell, a handful of people. And
oh, it's Sartre.
Yes. And what tortures them is other people. And so I think that this show, the first season, is No Exit. And I think that idea of hell as personages that torture emotionally is what's really fascinating, because we have that to an extent. Our definition of hell is outside of the presence of God. Without the presence of God, that would be hell. So we live in hell now. And not being able to have your family. So while they posit a world in Good Place where hell is other people that tortures you, we posit that hell is you can't be with the people that you want to be with. But I like that idea. I like that idea of the Good Place in our theology, that hell is not pitchforks and eternal fires and what are the penis smashers?
Yeah,
anal spiders.
Yeah, the penis smashing is the one they hit on the largest number of times.
Is that a
pun? I guess one final little bit as we wrap up, right? Just what a great show it was, just from start to finish. In my opinion, you maybe have more reservations of it, just in general. Maybe no, yes.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was cute. I didn't get the fulfillment that a lot of people had, but that's fine. I mean, that's not a criticism. It's just that it didn't resonate with me in the same way that it resonated with other people. But I watched every single episode, and I had to know what was going to happen next. So I think that speaks to the show.
Did you guess the twist in the end of the first season?
I unfortunately knew about that before I started watching the show.
Oh, so it was after the fact. I did not. I saw it pseudo live. I had no idea that it was coming. A friend of mine guessed immediately.
Oh, really?
Yes, and told his wife, yeah. I think they're in the bad place.
Ted Danson's face. If somebody knows where this quotation comes from, please let me know. I thought it was in the Hitchcock-Truffaut interview. I thought Hitchcock said it to Truffaut, but I can't find it, so it might be from somewhere else. But someone said that the greatest special effects in film is watching a human face change from one emotion to another.
Yeah.
And Ted Danson's face, as he changes from cheerful architect Michael to demon Michael, is just incredible.
It's absolutely incredible.
I mean, if we're going to talk about the acting, I think that was probably one of the things that made it more difficult for me to latch on, because in reality there was only 2 good actors in the show, and it was 2 people who had experience, Ted Danson and Kristen Bell. Everybody else,
there were a lot of newbies.
They were new. Not that they were bad, but they weren't necessarily good. The depth that that Bell and Danson brought to their roles, I do not believe, at least for me, was felt in Tahani or in Jason. Maybe Chidi a little bit, but
Jason,
the acting seemed was a little flat.
Jason got the part. There's an interview I've seen his tape, his audition tape, right? And he added a bit of some tears when he was talking. I don't remember what he was talking about, but he just added this little bit of he couldn't believe that somebody would do something like, and he just got the role because of that, of this one. He just portrayed it so well. Jason, I thought, didn't need to be such a great actor, as you're saying, because he was just so funny all the time. But I do agree about Belle. If you rewatch the finale and watch her panic as she realizes that Chidi is going to be leaving, every time Chidi turns away, her face just flashes with fear and pain, right? Yeah. In a way that immediately tells you what's going on, and it's fantastic.
Also, how is that The Good Place when succeeding at The Good Place leaves you with those kind of emotions?
Are there not tears in the Celestial Kingdom?
Here, I have a poem.
Okay.
This is by a Catholic poet, actually. I think it gets to what we're talking about, though. It's just 14 lines. Nothing in heaven functions as it ought. Peter's bifocals blindly sat on crack. His gates lurch wide with the cackle of a cock, not turn with the hush of gold as Milton had thought. Gains of the slaughtered innocents keep huffing the nimbus off the venerable bead, like that of an old dandelion gone to seed, and the beatific choir keeps breaking up, coughing. But hell, sleek hell, hath no free-willing part. None takes his own sweet time, none quickens pace. Ask anyone, how come you here, poor heart? And he will slot a quarter through his face. You'll hear an instant click. A tear will start, imprinted with an abstract of his case. The Good Place of the first episode was that kind of hell. Everything's perfect. I had some frozen yogurt today in celebration of this planned episode.
Yeah, good.
And it was good. As You Wish on Solano. It's great. I had the dark chocolate and the raspberry. It was excellent. But the idea that that's heaven, like that, it rings hollow.
Yeah.
Also, it's too judgmental. I mean, I listened to Misfit on the way here, and come on, man, Fred Durst is a genius. I'm only half joking.
All right. I hope you enjoyed the basketball that accompanied this episode, or the hockey.
We're coming to you live from the basement of the Berkeley Ward, where life is occurring in all its chaotic imperfection.
Yep. We're a proud member of the Dialogue Podcasting Network. You should check out the shows.
Yeah.
If you haven't watched The Good Place and you don't feel put off by all the spoilers from this episode, give it a shot.
Like I said, science says spoilers make things better.